let us get back to our topic, which we left off last week. This series is called JAttitudes, or JAttitudes, the Jewish attitudes, the most important attitudes for Jewish living. And we sort of gave an overview last week of the idea of the Sheish Mitzvos Tamidios, the 6 constant mitzvos. They are not things that you're necessarily literally thinking about and processing all the time, because we don't have necessarily the kind of hyper-threading technologies to be able to think, 6 different thoughts at once. We are, there are computers today, these supercomputers, they can do like billions of calculations per second. We don't really necessarily have that computing power. It's more reflected in attitudes. Before I get into the first of the 6, which is what we're going to do today, I just want to point out a very important idea. There was in the 1600s, there was a character named Shabtai Tzvi. He was a false messiah. The Jews were going through a horrific time. They had been through enormous persecution for hundreds of years in Europe. Pogroms and blood libels and crusades, just vicious persecution and anti-Semitism for hundreds of years. And then came along this figure who claimed to be the Messiah and swept through the countryside, gaining thousands and tens of thousands of followers, including some great rabbis, right? And he was a mystic, and he was sort of, people were really believe, like, this is it, the time has come, we're going to Israel, and there will be never again will there be any more anti-Semitism. This long exile, which has gone on for, 1,600 years, is finally about to end, and the people's spirits were lifted up incredibly high, and they were all dashed to the floor when Shabtai Tzvi was captured by the Turkish government, and he was forced to either convert to Islam or die, and he converted to Islam. And that was when the hearts of the Jewish people were broken. Not long after that rose the Hasidic movement, the movement of the Hasidim, which till today are a very, very strong component of the Jewish people. It was led by Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. And one of the main components that he brought to Judaism that was maybe not as expressed before was this intense emotional connection between God and the everyday man. And when it first started, there were many who were very against the Hasidic movement. They felt it was almost too similar to what had just happened with Shabtai Tzvi. A lot of mysticism, a lot of sort of this external activity and frenzied activity. The Hasidim would dance and sing their prayers, and they felt like it was too similar to Shabtai Tzvi, and they were afraid that this was going to be another devastating blow to the Jewish people. The Vilna Gaon, of course, is one of the most famous people who was vociferously against the rise of the Hasidic movement. But obviously it was the right thing at the right time, and obviously it was right also for the Vilna Gaon was correct. It is not saying the Vilna Gaon, God forbid, was wrong in his standing up against the tide of the Hasidic movement rise. If anything, could be he tempered it and kept it within the boundaries, and had it not had some pushback from the other parts of Judaism, it might have gone out of control and actually gone to where it was not supposed to go. But because it had the perfect push balance and pushback balance, Hasidic Judaism became very, very prominent in Europe. That was one movement. Long after that, there became what was known as the Musar movement. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter lived in the mid to late 1800s. He started what was called the Musar movement, which was the idea of this intense study and concentration on character development, right? That it was not enough to just sort of go through the motions of doing the right things Jewishly, doing the mitzvahs, buying your lulav and esrog and eating your matzah, but you had to really spend time, incredible amounts of time, developing yourself and internalizing these deep messages, making them bond with who you were. And every yeshiva, pretty much, by the time the early to mid 1900s rolled around, every yeshiva of prominence in the Lithuanian yeshiva system had what was known as a Musar Seder, a time where people would sit down, often with their hats and jackets, which is sort of what we put on when we want to show we're taking this seriously. They would sit down and study Musar intently for 20 minutes, 30 minutes a day, going over the same things again and again and really internalizing those messages. Then came the Holocaust. And the Holocaust was, of course, horrifically devastating to the Jewish people. And many people gave up, and there's, God forbid, no judgment here whatsoever, but we know that many people would walk up to the fence every day and clock out. Life was horrific and miserable beyond what we can even possibly comprehend. I've been to Auschwitz twice, and every time I'm there, I'm just so blown away by the fact that even though I'm sitting here, standing at the side of a crematoria, walking through a barracks, I have absolutely not an inkling, not a 1/100th, not a percent of an understanding of the real, true horrors of what Auschwitz was. So this is not at all a judgment on anybody who walked up to the fence and said, I'm done here. Many people gave up. And of course, we know from Viktor Frankl that even if you just gave up in your mind, right, once you gave up your existential will to life, your rate of survivorship was incredibly decreased. And even after the war, many who survived the war gave up on God. And again, there's no judgments here. Do not judge your friend until you walk a mile in his footsteps, right? And we will never, ever, ever get to where they were. So we have absolutely no idea what they went through, and there's no judgments, God forbid, ever. Every single Holocaust survivor is an absolute treasure for the Jewish people. But interestingly, the two groups that seem to be able to hold on the best, A, to their will to live, their existential will to live, and B, to their faith through the darkest hour of our people, were Hasidim and people who had gone through the Lithuanian yeshiva system, specifically the yeshiva system. And perhaps it could be said that it was because these two groups had maintained and built over decades and hundreds of years this emotional connection with God and their purpose on this world. It wasn't like they were going through this deep existential angst before the Holocaust. They had enormous, not just, I believe cerebrally in God, but rather this deep emotional connection with who they were and what their purpose was in the world. And then, nobody was able to strip it away from them. We have in our community an incredible survivor. His name is Matty Middleman. I'm sure many of you know him. And at one point, he describes, I've heard his story. He describes that one morning he was done. He was walking up to the fence. And then he remembered. He remembered his teachings. And he remembered that he was taught that if you commit suicide, you lose your share in the world to come. Now again, I don't know if that actually applies. I don't think that applies to people who committed suicide during the Holocaust. But at the end of the day, he said, I can't give that up. I can't give that up. And he turned around and he walked back to the barracks. And now, Baruch Hashem, thank God, he's here in our community. Such a tremendous, beautiful family of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Amazing. But he had this deep emotional connection to his beliefs. He had grown up as a Hasidic Jew in the Satmar community. And he had this intense emotional connection with his teachings. And when literally push came to shove, it was able to make the difference for him. Which is why what we're studying now is the 6 constant attitudes. The attitudes that we're studying, it's not enough, we're going to see today, to cerebrally know things. They have to become integrated into who we are. They have to become part of our very identity and actions. Things that walk with us. Our attitude towards life. Not just a set of questions that you can check off with the right boxes. And if we are able to take these 6 beliefs, these 6 attitudes, over the course of this series and really bring it into our life, that will give us the power to have immense, immense strength in the face of challenge, and immense fuel when we're not being challenged to be able to go out and do the right thing again and again and again and more and more and more. So with that introduction, let's launch into the first of the most essential Jewish attitudes. But before that, I want to give a great Yashar Koach to the good Lord above for creating H2O, because He done a great job with this, let me tell you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh bidvaro. Even Coca-Cola can't beat this, right? Well, you know what, by the way, it's actually funny. Nowadays, I think last year, 2016, was the first year ever that more bottled water sold than soda. So, alrighty. Okay. So let's go into our first attitude that we need to carry with us at all times. And that is the emunah b'Hashem. Faith in God. Faith in God, which we're gonna break down now. In the words of the Chinuch, the book of education, which again is where we base these 6 constant mitzvos on, I'm going to read to you sort of his explanation of this belief. Laha'amin sheyesh la'olam eloka echad she'emtzi kol hanimtza. To believe that there is to the world one God who created all that has been created. Umikocho v'chavtzo haya kol mashehu. And from His strength and His power, everything came to be. Everything that exists is now. V'shehaya, and everything that existed. V'sheyiyeh la'adei, and that will exist forever and ever. So again, first step is to believe that He is the creator of all that existed, exists, and will exist. V'chi hu hotzianu me'aretz Mitzrayim v'nasam lanu haTorah, and that He took us out of the land of Egypt and He gave us the Torah. Shene'emar b'tchilas nesina haTorah, as it says in the beginning of the giving of the Torah, which we're going to be celebrating at Shavuos very shortly. The holiday is coming up on the 6th of Sivan, as it does every year, but this year will be the 30th of May, as we celebrate the Sinai experience where Hashem came out and said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzisicha Meretz Mitzrayim. I am Hashem your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Upeirusho, and says the Chinuch, the explanation of this is Ki'ilu Amar. It's as if God is saying, Teidu v'ta'aminu sheyesh la'olam Elokah. Know and believe that the world has a God. Ki milas Anochi Toreh al hamitzius. The word I am is an indicator of that existence, right? When you say I am, that obviously means I exist. So that's the very most basic level. So on the basic level, by saying I am, Hashem says Anochi, I am, it's saying I exist. Ba'asher amar asher otzeisicha, and that God said He took you out of the land of Egypt. Lomar shelo yifata levavchem lakachas inyan seischem me'avus Mitzrayim u'makos Mitzrayim derech mikra. This is to say, do not assume that all that happened in your coming out of Egypt happened by way of just happenstance. It happened to get very, very dark. There happened to be a plague of locusts. The water happened to turn red, right? Ela de'u she'anochi hu she'otzeisi eschem b'chefetz u'b'hashkacha. I was the one who took you out with my will and with my involvement, like He had promised our forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay. So, according to the Chinuch, which again is the book of education, written in the 13th century, the first of the constant mitzvos, the first of the constant attitudes that one has to have, is the belief in the existence of God. And he bases it on the first of the 10 commandments. I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt. Now, this is a controversial statement. There is actually a great machlokas. There's a great dispute amongst the early commentators. When God said, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, was that a commandment? Or was that a statement? clearly the chinuch is taking it as a commandment. However, and so does Nachmanides, however, there are many other commentators who say that it is not a commandment, including the Bahag and Rav Sadia Gaon. They say it's a statement of fact. And it seems like almost like they make more sense. Let's explain why. I walk in and I stand up in front of all of you today and I say, "Good afternoon, I am Leiby Burnham." And guess what happens? No one moves, no one goes anywhere. I didn't give you any instructions, right? Had I said, "Good afternoon, I am Leiby Burnham, let's get up and do a few jumping jacks before we start our class." I might have a little bit of mutiny on board. "Rabbi, we just ate those delicious cookies. I'm going to get a cramp if I start doing jumping jacks." Maybe yeah, maybe no, but you'll know what I'm saying to you. If I say, "Hi guys, please get up and do jumping jacks." But if I get up and say, "Hi, I'm Leiby Burnham," that's just a statement of fact. That's not a commandment. So when God comes and says, "Hi, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt," it doesn't seem to be a commandment. So it almost seems like the early commentators who believe that it's a statement, and what their view is, it's a statement saying, "I am the Lord your God, therefore here are my commandments. Don't have other gods, don't swear falsely, don't use my name in vain, honor your mother and father, keep the Sabbath, don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery," and so on and so forth. But if we want to understand the first of the 10 commandments as being a mitzvah, as the chinuch does, and as Nachmanides does, how do we understand that? So let's think about this. What is the difference between the "I am Leiby Burnham" and "I am the Lord your God"? In terms of one being a commandment and one being a statement. So for starters, it's like this. If I come in here and say, "I'm Leiby Burnham," you all know that. You're looking at me. You can see me, you can hear me, right? As a matter of fact, when I usually get up here, I don't say that. You know why? Because you already know it. Amazingly. I stand up here, I clear my throat, I say, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen." Everyone looks up. There's no need for me to say, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Leiby Burnham." You already know it. Not that simple of a statement when you're saying, "I'm the Lord your God." Because God is generally not seeable. Doesn't clear his throat and start speaking to us in very loud, audible tones. And therefore, if God starts off by saying, "I am the Lord your God," says Nachmanides and the chinuch, what he's saying here is, believe in this. In other words, I don't need to say it in the context of all my other commandments. It's only because it is such a ambiguous, the idea of the God and the divine is hard for human beings who are very physical, and everything we interact with is physical pretty much. It's hard for us to comprehend this idea. Therefore, when God says, "I'm the Lord your God," it's not like me coming in and saying, "Hi, I'm Leiby Burnham." That you know, that you see. But God you don't know and you don't see. Which is why God needs to put that down as the first commandment. He's not saying it as an informational, he's saying it as a commandment. Now it seems almost like, what's the purpose of God doing this? Here's why. You guys ready? We're going to go back and forth. If you're not a believer, reading in the Torah that it says, "I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt," probably not going to change your beliefs much. Right? You're like, that was just written by a bunch of people. So if you're not a believer, the fact that it's written in this book is probably not going to change much. And if you are a believer, hey, you're already a believer. God's talking to preaching to the choir. So it just seems like a strange mitzvah. If you don't believe, saying, it's like, yesterday there was a whole thing, I don't know if you guys are familiar, I'm sure you are familiar, Trump fired Comey, right? And there was a whole thing yesterday, so Kellyanne Conway is one of the big Trump spokesmen, came out and said, "This is not a cover-up." That's generally something you don't want to say. All right, when Nixon came out and said, "I'm not a crook, I've never covered up anything," that wasn't a good thing to say on TV. As a political maneuver, it's usually not good to say, "This is not a cover-up," because all people hear is cover-up. Yeah. So whether it was a cover-up or not, I don't care. It's none of my business. I'm not here to judge politics. You guys can all do that in your own time. We've got more important things to do right now. But the point is, like, that whole statement, this is not a cover-up, it just seems like a weird statement to be saying. You're not going to convince the unconvinced by saying, those people who are certain that Comey was sacked because he was asking for more money to investigate the Russia-Trump connection, you're not going to say that. You're not going to have Kellyanne Conway marching out on TV and saying, this is not a cover-up, and they're like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. For some reason I thought it was a cover-up, but now Kellyanne Conway said it's not a cover-up, so it must not be a cover-up. And for those who believe in trust in Trump and are diehard Trump fans, they don't need Kellyanne Conway to go up and say this is not a cover-up. They've been preaching that to their friends already ever since the news came out. Seems like, what's going on over here? No, I am Lord your God. Who are you talking to? The non-believers are not going to say, oh, I didn't know you said I'm the Lord your God in your book that I believe is written by man. And now that I've seen that, okay, I changed my whole position. And the people who are believers, they're like, I already believe it. You guys with me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. You guys are with me. Okay, so let's try to understand this. Maimonides, the man who gave us the 13 Principles of Faith. He has a section in his work. His work is called Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah. And he writes, it's called the Laws of the Foundations and the Fundamental Principles of the Torah. And I want to read to you the very first statement in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah. This is the very first statement in pretty much the entire Maimonides Mishnah Torah, his massive compendium, in which he gathered together all the laws that were available, basically two of them at the time, not every single one, but all the essential ones, and he made it into this massive work, which is really, today is being studied in yeshivas all over the world, and is one of the three fundamental texts which helped create our Jewish code of law, right? So basically, long story short, we have what's called the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish code of law, which was based on a previous work written by the Tur, who was a great man named Rav Avram ben Asher, and Rav Avram ben Asher, he wrote his commentary, or his law book, based on the law books of three previous great people, his father, the Rosh, the Rif, and the Rambam. Okay, so it's a very fundamental Jewish text. And this is how Maimonides opens up the very beginning of his entire magnum opus. Yesod ha-yesodos, the foundation of all foundations, ve'amud ha-chachmos, and the pillar of all wisdom, is a leida sheyesh sham matzoi shem matzoi rishon, to know that there is a first existence. That's what he calls God, right? God is the first existence. So he starts off saying this is the very, very most foundational foundation. But it's very interesting. He does not say that the foundation is to believe that there is a first existence. He says the very first foundation is to know that there is a first existence. To know. Leida. To know that there is a matzoi rishon. That there is a first existence. V'hu mamtzi kol hanimtza, and that first existence is what created all that came after it. V'chol hanimtzaim mishamayim v'aretz u'ma shebeneim lo nimtzu ela me amitas hemtza'o. And everything that's in the heavens and the earth and everything in between comes from his bringing it into existence. Okay, so now, Maimonides is saying that you've got to know this. It's not about belief. Belief is not enough. You've got to know it. Now let's try to understand what knowing looks like. You have the Jews who came out of Egypt. Okay? They saw a lot of incredible things. A lot of really incredible things. Frogs, locusts, hail, boils, pestilence, darkness, splitting of the sea. They had seen all the gods of the Egyptians crumble. The Egyptians worshipped the Nile River, which gave them all their source of life, their water. And the very first plague turned into blood. The Egyptians worshipped the sheep. The sheep died in the pestilence and died in the plague of hail. The Egyptians worshipped Pharaoh as a god. Pharaoh himself, on the night of the slaying of the firstborn, is running through the Jewish quarter saying, "Where's Moses? I beg you, I made a mistake. Please, please, I'm totally wrong. Just take your people and go. Humbled in front of Moses, God's messenger. The Egyptians believed in their powers of black magic, but yet there were plagues like the plague of lice where the sorcerers could do nothing like it. And they had to admit, this is the hand of God. This is beyond our abilities. But yet, even with all that, they didn't necessarily know that God existed. When does that happen? When God comes down on Mount Sinai and speaks to them and says, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. That's when they're supposed to know. Maimonides is saying that what we are supposed to do is we're supposed to know like that. That is a tall order. Tall order. How do we do this? So, we'll talk about Maimonides' idea. We'll talk about the Chinuch's idea. Maimonides says it's a philosophically obvious idea. Meaning, we've got a table here. Who created that table? Somebody in Cambodia. And who created that factory? Somebody in America, right, with a lot of money. Right? And who created that person? And you can start going through everything. And who created, well, what's it made out of? It's not made out of trees, it's made out of plastic. And where did the plastic come from? All plastic came from petroleum. And where did the petroleum come from? And the petroleum came out of the earth and from dying fossils. And where did the fossils come from? Previous animals. We can start going back all the way. We can take it all back. But eventually, everything's going to go back to some moment. Everything here is created from something here, from something before it, right? That's the law of conservation of energy in the world. Everything comes from something. Where does that all come from? Right. Philosophically, it has to be. Now, the word God, it's interesting how Maimonides uses this language, a first reality, a first existence, right? His language sort of mimics some other philosophers from before. Now, the bottom line is everything has to have come from something, and then eventually there has to be something that created it. Because you can't go back to infinity, right? You can't go back. Then there's got to be at some point where some force brought this all into being. Of course, scientists today have absolutely no idea. Ask any scientist worth his salt, where did the Big Bang come from? We're talking about all the energy that all the universe would ever have. Where did it all come from? That's one of the big mysteries of science. They know they're whooped on that question. And exactly where they're whooped is our strength. Meaning, everything had to come from somewhere. And if everything is created by something else, whatever it was that created everything, that's the power where it all lies from, right? Again, you don't want to say the word God, because God is almost taboo, especially around college campuses. Yeah. You don't want to say the word God, fine. It's a first creation, first creator. Again, not creation. Creation means it was created by something. At a certain point, though, you can go back, everything was created by this, created by this. At some point, though, there's got to be a first creator. That's God. Philosophically, if you ponder it enough, you can come to believe in this. We're not all philosophers. What else can we do to bring this into our consciousness? Well, the good news is the Chinuch gives us 3 different strategies for sort of coming to this belief. The first one is talking about our belief. King David in the book of Psalms says, Hamanti ki adaber ani anisi meod. I believe because I spoke, is the way the Hasidic rabbis explain this verse. I believe because I spoke. Because you asked me how I'm doing today, and I said, thank God, fine. And tomorrow you asked me, what's going on with your kid? I said, oh, thank God, he's doing all right. And when I went through it, when I heard about something terrible that was impending, I said, God forbid. I brought God into my everyday language. And the more you bring something into your day-to-day reality, the more it becomes a reality for you. There was a story about Rav Moshe Wolbe, Rav Shlomo Wolbe, who was a, Rav Wolbe he was known as, a great, great Musar leader, died just not many years ago. I was in his house. And then I was in his house probably in the year 1993. And he was the mashkiach, the spiritual guide of Yeshivas Ber Yaakov in Israel. And he one time traveled to Rabbi Yecheskel Levenstein, who was the mashkiach, the spiritual dean of Yeshiva Panovich, one of the famous large yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael. And he wanted to discuss with him a difficulty he was having with one of his students. Rabbi Wolbe was legendary for his sensitivity and his desire to focus on every single situation, every single person, and really think about and how we deal with this situation, how we deal with this person. Every human being is unique. They had the whole conversation. And as they were leaving, Reb Chatzkel Levenstein says to Reb Shlomo Wolbe, again, are both great sages, he says, tell me, do you believe in a creator? He said, of course. Do you really know that there was a creator? Of course. You really, really know there's a creator? And he's standing there, like, yeah, I do. Rav Chatzkel says, good. Now go tell your students that. Go tell your students that there's a creator. And he's thinking, what? Okay. He walks out. He's just trying to unpack what just happened there. And finally he realized, you can often go through life doing everything right. You're doing all the mitzvahs. You're making brachas. You're praying. You're shaking that lulav. You're eating that matzah. You're blowing that shofar. You're doing all the good deeds. But you can do that without ever really, really internalizing the message that there's a God. And in order to do that, you got to talk about it. Because what we talk about becomes our reality. The first step, says the chinuch, in bringing this God consciousness into our life, is simply talking about it. Number one. Number two, sacrificing for God. When we sacrifice for God, God gives us the gift of knowing Him. Again, it's a world of measure for measure. When we sacrifice of ourselves, so to speak, for God, God opens up His reality to us. Rav Shach, who was the great Rosh Yeshiva of that Yeshiva of Panovich for many, many decades, who died over 100 years old. He was over 100 years old. Mind you, he spent probably 0% of his entire life on a treadmill. He was connected to the source of life. That's how he lived to be over 100 years old. He was connected deeply to the source of life. And he was once asked, what was his greatest moment of joy in his life? What was his greatest moment? Here's a man who lived to be, thank God, 100, and I think it was 102, or 100, I think it was 102, maybe 104. And yeah, it's a lot of experiences, a lot of experiences. What was the greatest joy in your life? Listen to this remarkable answer. He said that early on in the Germans' activities, the Germans were always looking for yeshiva students. They were taught that the Talmud Lehrer, the Talmud learners, were the key to the Jewish society. And if they could only break those, that would be their biggest chance of success. Got to break through those who are studying Torah. It's amazing. They got it right. They got it right. So they were always on the lookout for rabbis, yeshiva students. And he was with a group of students that were rounded up. And they were at a train platform. And they knew they were being sent to their death. And And they just started to dance. They can have our bodies. They can never have us and our connection to God. That's all we have right now. We've been stripped of our possessions. We've been stripped of every shred of dignity. We've been stripped of everything. But they can't take our God away from us. And they started dancing. And that was the greatest moment in his life.
Was he one of the dancers?
Yeah.
Oh, he was.
So it's funny, actually, it's funny you asked that, because I saw two stories in two similar places. One where Shach was talking about other people in Auschwitz dancing by the gas chambers, and one where he was talking about his own life, where he was not in the gas chambers, he was not in Auschwitz, but he was at a platform thinking he was being sent to his death.
So he didn't get sent to his death because he was dancing?
No, somehow whatever happened, God intervened. Meaning, he wasn't dancing that God should intervene. He thought he was done. But he was just ready to sacrifice it all for God. Just say, you know what? I just want my connection with you. That's all that I care about in this world. I'll tell you another remarkable story, and this I heard just over Pesach. I've got a sister-in-law. Her name is Rachel Burnham. She's actually, we call her Rachel Burnham II, because she married my brother. Her name used to be Avigdor. And then she married my brother. But by the time she married my brother, I had already had a daughter named Rachel. And when she got engaged to my brother, my daughter went over to her and said, my daughter was probably 6 years old at the time, or whatever it was. She just wanted her to let her know very clearly, actually I think she was 5, she wanted to let her know very clearly, she's Rachel Burnham I, you know? Exactly. So until my daughter gets married, my sister-in-law is Rachel Burnham II. But God willing, in the right time, my daughter Rachel Burnham I should get married to a wonderful man, probably with a different name, being that I don't know any other Jewish Burnhams in the world besides my family. So I hope if she gets married to someone with a different name, and then Rachel Burnham II will be able to assume the title she's been waiting so long for, Rachel Burnham I. Rachel Burnham II, however, has a grandmother who lives in Australia. Also, she's very elderly. I think she's in her late 90s. Sharp as a whippersnapper, and she frequently Skypes with my brother and sister-in-law. Every week they call her at least once to talk with her, and they've gone to visit her in Australia. It's obviously a long and expensive trek, but they speak to her every week on Skype. Listen to this amazing story. So she was in Auschwitz, and on the way to Auschwitz, someone in her train car told her, if they ask if you have any trade, make sure you tell them you have a trade. Even though you don't, whatever, she was a young girl. But just tell them you have a trade of some sort, because that's the ones they keep alive. So when she got off the train, someone came out and asked the group as they were spilling out of the trains, are there any cooks here? And immediately she said, I'm a cook! But she wasn't. She grew up in a wealthy household, and she probably never cooked herself anything other than water. But immediately, I'm a cook! She was, as of that day. And by the way, not only was it amazing that she stayed alive, because she was very young, and probably she would have been sent to the left by Mengele, or whoever else was doing the inspection that day. But the kitchen was the one place that everybody wanted a job in Auschwitz. You had access to food. Really kept her alive. So it was an amazing hashgacha, an amazing divine providence that someone had just told her in the car, if they ask if you have a trade, just tell them you have a trade. And then she comes out, one of the first things she hears, she's still tumbling off the train, is there any cooks here? Me. I'm a cook. And she got a job that A, kept her alive, just from being selected for the gas chambers, and B, kept her alive, that she had access to food, and she was even able to help other people with food and smuggle out food.
Did she have enough, or was it just...
She had enough for herself.
Did she have to sneak it for herself if she wanted more?
So, yeah, there's obviously, no one was allowed to take food. No workers in the kitchen were officially allowed to take food. It wasn't like the policy in the kitchen was, well, since you're a kitchen worker, eat as much as you want. No, everyone had to take food. If you were going to live in Auschwitz, right, you had to Yeah, no one. The Nazis were not doling out generous rations to anybody. Now, they were actually the one group that was getting more generous rations were the Sonderkommando, who unfortunately were in charge of taking the bodies out of the gas chambers and putting them into the crematoria. And they would always, unfortunately, after a few weeks, they would always push them in because they didn't want the Sonderkommando to report on their activities after the war. So those were the only people who got like more generous rations. Anyway, so she's in the kitchen one day, and somebody comes into the kitchen and says, "Today's Yom Kippur." And he says, "I've smuggled in a machzor, a Yom Kippur prayer book." Said to her, "You can use this. Obviously, make sure you don't get caught. And after you're done with it, make sure to give it to somebody else, so they can use it too." Fine. So she quickly does whatever she's got to do in the kitchen, and she goes to the corner, because the kitchen was usually very quiet at the time. She'd been working there for months. She knew the kind of the rhythm of the kitchen. And she goes to the corner, and she starts praying with a machzor in the kitchen of Auschwitz. And who walks in? Dr. Joseph Mengele. Dr. Joseph Mengele walks in flanked by a bunch of guards. They're in the middle of doing an inspection on the sanitary conditions of the kitchen. And as soon as she sees him in the corner of her eye, she's thinking, what should she do? She can try to like hide it and pretend like she was doing something there. Or she can just say, you know what, this is Yom Kippur. I'm not playing that game. I'm talking to God. And I'm not doing anything else. And you want to, you want to take me, take me. And she decides that's what she's doing. It's Yom Kippur. She's not breaking her Shemona Esrei for no Dr. Joseph Mengele. So she's standing there and praying. And Dr. Joseph Mengele, the doctor of death, sees her, and she's holding a machzor, and she's praying like this. She's not trying to hide it. She's not trying to pretend like she was stirring a pot. She's praying with a machzor in the kitchen of Auschwitz. And Mengele starts to curse at her, and he spits at her, and he just walks on. Isn't that amazing? When we sacrifice for God, God opens up for us tremendous, tremendous things. Now, I want to point out, sacrifice for God does not have to look like that. Right? That is not what sacrifice for God looks like in our lives. Thank God! Thank God we don't live in the Holocaust. Sacrifice for God in our lives looks like I'm with a bunch of people and they start talking about Mrs. Cohn, and I say, guys, let's not do that. Sacrifice for God is when I'm working on a business deal, and whatever it is, there's a little room for me to get a little bit more for myself, an extra $10,000. All I got to do is just change one percentage or one number, and no one's going to know, and I don't do it, and I don't do it. Sacrifice for God means when I want to I've had a long day, and I just want to sit back and do nothing. And instead I say, no, don't do nothing. Do something valuable. And I do that. That's sacrifice for God. And every time we sacrifice for God, God opens himself up to us a little. He says, you want a relationship with me? You want to open up to me, so to speak? Sacrifice for me, I'll open up to you. That's another way we get to have this faith, this belief, not just faith, but belief in God. And the last is by using our wisdom. I happen to be lucky. I love science. I love reading up on new things, new discoveries, how things work from a scientific perspective. I love reading up on exotic animals and their defense mechanisms. And the more you start reading and using your wisdom to see the complexity of the world, how sound waves work, how your eye sees everything upside down and your brain retranslates it for you, how the mechanics of every human cell, how many different organelles are swimming around in every human cell, how many different components there are and what their exact functions are. And the more you use your wisdom to understand the vast complexity of creation, the more you come to a recognition that there had to be a first creator, as Maimonides says. You just know it. So those are four tools. Maimonides says go at it from a philosophical perspective. Just everything was created. Something was created by something else. And the tree was created by a seed, and the seed was created by this. And go back and forth all the way until you can't go back anymore. And then whatever created that, that's God. It's a very philosophical, hard to grasp if you're not philosophically minded. And then you have the three ways that the Chinuch gave us. Number one, talking about God. Talking to God. Making Him part of your everyday conversation. When someone asks you how you're doing, you say, "Thank God, I'm doing well." When you had a business meeting, and before you go in, you say to God, "God, please, hook it up." And then you come out, and your spouse says to you, "How did it go today?" And you say, "God shined His blessing on us today." And when your kid is not feeling well, you say, "God willing, he'll get better." And you talk to God. The more you talk things out, the more they create realities for you. That's why in therapy, we talk things out. We have people talk to their father who's long gone or mother and say things that they've always wanted to say. Because when you're finally able to say those things, it creates this internal belief. Someone in therapy facing down their abusive father or mother or whatever it was and saying to them, "I am not a failure like you told me I was going to be. I have incredible value to myself and to my community and to my family." And saying that again and again creates that reality in people's mind. That's why we do it. It's effective. Talking about God, talking to God, sacrificing for God, and using our wisdom and intellect to discover God in all the farthest corners of the galaxy and everything very, very vast and very, very small. These are the first steps for making God a part of our everyday life. And with that, we will conclude for today. Thank you. Have a wonderful week.